All right, everyone. So, in our last module, we went over sort of the basics of using Adobe Animate as an animation tool. We went over, doing insert blank keyframe and inserting keyframe and what that meant, the differences between using a frame to extend the length time-wise of uh, a keyframe. We also talked about using onion skin, just general kind of, simple frame to frame type animation. Hopefully you guys are working on the lab that's associated with that. So what we're going to be doing is talking about what is called the 12 principles of animation. Okay. I know some of you are aware of this, some of you are not from the survey that I did. If you have learned it before, great. This will just be kind of review and, hopefully you can kind of get some more out of it. Hopefully, if not, if this is new to you, this is some important stuff to consider. So what is the principles of animation? So the principles of animation, it's this animation term or theory that was coined in 1981. There was this book called The Illusion of Life by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson. These two people were some of the original animators for the Disney, animation studio back in the 30s and whatnot. And they laid out what they consider to be their important principles for making good animation. Okay. And what we're going to do in this video is kind of talk about them. And, I'll show some examples. I can't show examples of everything, but, we'll try to talk about it as much as we can. Some of these examples, will come from here where I've made some pages that show examples of some of these in action, and I'll try to demonstrate them. So the 12 principles of animation are squash and stretch, anticipation, staging, arcs, solid drawing, pose to pose versus straight ahead, slow in, slow out, follow through and overlap, exaggeration, spacing and timing, secondary actions, and appeal. Okay. So let's talk a little more about what does all that mean. Okay. So what is squash and stretch? Okay. So if I'm just going to draw, or I'll try to draw something really quickly in Adobe Animate. We'll see how well that goes, but I'll try. So let's say I'm just going to draw a circle. Let me try to, I'll do a little thinner here. So, okay, there's my circle. I'll use some onion skinning here. This is not going to be my greatest animation by far, but just something. Let's just look at all my drawings here. All right, let me play back my animation. It's fine, right? But the thing about my animation here is it feels kind of rigid, okay? And the one thing that you really have to learn about making good animation is animation responds and exaggerates. I'm not going to spell this correctly. I'm so bad at spelling. Exaggerates. Oh, so close. Okay. Am I kind of close? Yeah, it's kind of close. Okay. To physics. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if I have a ball, I'm looking for a ball. in my room here, but I don't have one. But all right, I have this pencil, okay, and I drop it. So what happens? Well, the pencil falls because of gravity, okay? And we as humans, we always compare animation to reality. You know, we correspond what we see in everyday life, how people move, how objects fall, things fall down, they don't fall up. When things hit a surface, they collide and bounce off of it or something like that, right? So when we watch animation, we need the things that we see to correspond to physics. Otherwise, our brain is like, it doesn't quite match up. So in other words, like if I were to let go of this pencil and it went up as opposed to down, that would be hard for our brain to quite understand because we're not used to seeing that. I mean, maybe if we're in space or something, but on Earth, that doesn't happen, right? And so when my ball is, so what does this have to do with squash and stretch? Well, when your ball is falling, in theory, in terms of physics, what it's really doing is it's speeding up, okay? Or it's gaining momentum. So how do we show that? Well, what we usually do is our object will kind of stretch a little bit, okay? Kind of like silly putty. Now, in real life, do things stretch? Not really, or at least not really to the level that we as humans would really notice it much. But the whole point of animation, like I said, is to respond to physics, but also to exaggerate physics. Okay. So while it's falling, it's also kind of stretching a little bit. Okay. Now, in my example here, this very simple example, this ball is falling. So it's stretching to show the speed momentum gain. And then eventually it's going to hit a surface. Okay. And that momentum is going to stop. If my hand is the ball, it just goes boom and it stops, right? So how do we show? So the momentum is hitting that surface and it's distributing all of that momentum. So how do we show that how do we show that physics in our animation? Well, what we do is we squash it. Okay. Imagine you had dough, like a piece of dough, like a pizza ball or something, or some cookie dough or something, and you made it into a little ball and you dropped it on your countertop. It would smash and it would kind of flatten out a little bit, probably not all the way, but it would sort of, kind of squash a little bit on the table. That's how you should expect, that's kind of the reaction to physics. It's falling, it hits, it disperses. When we do, to show this in in animation, when something hits a surface or it reflects off of something, bounces off of something, it helps to have a little bit of a squash. Okay, so this ball falls, it stretches a little bit, and then when it hits a surface and responds to it, it squashes a little bit. All right, so let's see some examples of this. Oops, I thought I had more, but all right. So here's some very basic. Let me see if I can do this. So it's like the ball is falling. It's starting at 0 in terms of its speed. And as it falls, it's gaining in speed because when something falls, it falls with gravity. Gravity is actually causing the object to speed up a little bit, 9.8 meters per second. And so you can see now it's speeding up. And so it's stretching a little bit. See how it's like stretching. And then now it's going to hit the ground. And this is where it's going to start to react to hitting the ground. And it's squashing. Okay. So now when it bounces back up, it still has that momentum of like all that energy. It did squash, but it's still going up. Now, this animation's a little bit weird because if you bounce a ball, unless it's bouncing against a very bouncy surface, like a trampoline or something like that, it should lose some of its speed because the collision is actually causing inertia, which is causing it to slow down a little bit. So normally it wouldn't go all the way back up, but it's fine. But you can see it's like, okay, it's falling, it's bouncing, it's reacting, and then it's springing back up because of that speed, and then it's slowing down. When an object bounces upward like a ball, it's actually fighting against gravity. Gravity is literally pushing it down, which is causing it to slow down. So actually, when you bounce, if an object is bouncing, its fastest when it's moving up should be right here. This is the fastest point. Okay, that's why it's a little bit stretched out, and then as it gets higher, it's starting to, form its normal shape because it's getting slower. Then it hits here where it stops, and then now it falls again. And then once again, because it's falling, it's moving with gravity, which is causing it to speed up, react, go fast, slow down, speed up, react, move back up, slow down, and then over and over and over. For some reason, now all of a sudden it's getting this burst of energy. That's a little bit weird because we've not really seen that, but whatever, go with it, I suppose. If I was looking at this animation, I'd be like, why all of a sudden did it have that burst of energy? But whatever. Here's another example. So it's like, this object is, let's just play it once through and then we'll see it. Okay. So what's happening here is this is squashing a little bit and then it's pushing up. This actually gets into something called an anticipation action, which we'll talk about in a second, but it's like it squashes and then stretches and then comes back down. Okay, this little pedestal thing. Now the ball is actually doing the same thing where it's like the ball is stretching, bouncing, stretching, bouncing, and then it's like bouncing over here, squashing, stretching. Would have squashed there, but then it's like stretched out. This actually falls under exaggeration. So once again, it's like, let's watch this ball bounce here. So stretch, squash, stretch, squash, stretch, and then through, squash, and then, yeah. Okay. So that's squash and stretch. Okay. Here's some more examples of it where it's like, it doesn't, I'm using a ball because that's kind of the traditional way of showing squash and stretch, but you can see how it's like, you can squash and stretch a character. So it's like this character, it's like here he's stretching his body like right here to be very tall. And then it's like coming down like his literal fat and it's like squashing here. Here this character is stretching in and then squashing down when it's about to jump. All right, next is something called an anticipation action. Anticipation in animation is used to prepare an audience for an action and to make the action appear more realistic. The more physical the action, the more anticipation helps to deliver the action. So what I mean by that is like, if someone in an animation is about to do something, they usually sort of telegraph that they're going to do something. So in other words, like, it's kind of hard to see in my video, but it's like, if I was going to punch in an animation, rather than doing like that, I would wind up and then punch. Okay. This wind up draws in the attention of the audience, and then they're focusing on my hand, and then I punch. Okay. Or another example is like here, it's like the character, swings the mallet or the hammer. So it's like they wind up, everyone's watching that wind up, and then you come down. Okay. Or someone with a baseball bat, they don't just go, they wind up and then they follow through. Okay. Or like a pitcher, a pitcher, they wind up, they do the little thing to even add a little more to it in old traditional cartoons, and then they throw. It makes the action look a little more, it helps to sell the action because the anticipation basically preps the person, the audience watching it to expect the next action. Okay. So let's have a couple examples here. So here's this kind of classic Tom and Jerry. So he has like a cleaver, right? So it's like he winds up and then swings through. So it's like we're watching, his wind up there gets us to follow what he's doing, which is swinging cleaver. Okay. Here's another one from, I believe this is from Lilo and Stitch, the movie. Might be from the TV show, I'm not sure. But it's like, the fireball or whatever it is hot. So it's like, ooh, 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 ooh. So you're watching that, right? And then he winds up and then he throws it. Okay. So rather than just like throwing it, it's like, and then throwing it, right? So it's the anticipation of what Leela or Stitch is going to do with it. Okay. Here's another example that I found. So this is like, let's say you have this character grabbing a ball, right? He just grabs the ball. There's no anticipation. He just kind of grabs it, right? Now it's like, see how the body's reacting a little bit first? It's kind of like pushing back and then, so that little anticipation, it makes you focus on the character, which then means you're going to focus on part of that character, which is their arm. And then you're going to notice the action of actually picking up the ball. Okay. So that's anticipation, which is, when possible, try to have some sort of pose or action before the main action. So if my character was going to jump, before they jump, I would have them like bend down a little bit and then jump. Okay, as opposed to just jumping. Like you kind of like, it's kind of like pantomime. I don't know if you've ever like taken pantomime or anything like that, where it's like, you have to really sell the action of what you're doing without words. So it's like you over exaggerate every action that you're doing. You know what I mean? All right. So that is anticipation. Next, principle is staging. Okay. What staging really means is presenting your scene or your characters in a way that's easy for the audience to understand. Okay. So here's what I mean by that. If I was a character in an animation, it's like if I was drinking coffee, I would normally drink coffee like this because that's how people really drink coffee. But in an animation, it's like, well, I want everyone to know that if I'm a character, that my character is drinking, coffee or whatever it is that they're drinking. So here's how I would have my character, drinking coffee in an anime. I would have him like, do something like that. Now, is that how I drink coffee? No, I don't think anyone really drinks coffee that way. But the point is, it's not about how people do it. It's expressing the idea of drinking coffee to the audience. Okay. So here it's like, I have this duck, and this duck is a magician. So he's, pulling a rabbit out of a hat, right? And, the way that the duck is standing, it's kind of awkward. Like, I don't know if, the way his body is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of very hard. Sometimes I try to put myself in the body form. It's like this it's kind of a little awkward. But it's not about whether the character would really do that. The point is, it's like it's easy as us, the audience, to tell what's happening, which is that the duck is pulling a rabbit out of a hat. There's an old idea that if you can take the characters and make them a silhouette and still be able to tell what's happening, that is good staging. Okay. So here it's like I can tell what's happening here, even though I can't really see any textures or facial expressions. Okay. Here's that same idea, that same character, but this time the character is kind of facing the camera and it's like this and it feels kind of tight. So it's like, it's the same action, you know, roughly. I mean, he's pulling a rabbit out of a hat, but it's harder to tell what's happening. Okay. Even if that's more realistic to like what someone would really do, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what people would really do. What matters is people understand what's happening. So this might be, you know, when we make this a silhouette, it's kind of hard to tell what's happening. So this would be considered not the best staging. So there's an old saying in movies, you show, you don't tell. In other words, like the body language and the atmosphere should tell the audience what's happening. Words in this case should not be used. Okay. So think about if someone is upset, how do you show their body language to show that they're upset? They'd be like pulling, you know, their heads like this, like, you know, really over exaggerate everything. How can we tell that this woman is, you know, what's going on here? Well, she looks like she's struggling. How can I tell? Where her body's kind of at a weird angle, right? She's kind of like, it looks like she's fighting wind, you know, like her hair is blowing back and she's got like a scarf or something that's blowing back, right? What's going on here? Well, I'm assuming this guy's falling. He's in an awkward position that you wouldn't get to normally by just having, you know, standing around or laying down. So I'm assuming he's falling, you know. And so that's examples of staging. Next is the idea of arcs. Okay. Arcs is the idea that in real life, things don't typically move in a straight line. A lot of times they move in an arc. So if you were to throw a baseball from the left side to the right side, it doesn't really go straight. What really happens is the baseball kind of goes up a little bit and then it goes down because of gravity. Okay. So it's going up because it's very hard to do anything perfectly straight. And then the literal gravity is kind of pushing it down. So it really moves more in an arc. Okay. So if I move my arm, I move my arm more like in an arc. I don't move it like this. That's very unnatural. Okay. Tends to look a little more mechanical. So here it's like, okay, you know, this guy's arm is swinging. That should be more in an arc. So it's like when this guy swings the baseball bat, it should be swung in kind of an arc format. You know, when people move their arms like snow angels, right? They kind of go in an arc formation. Here's some more examples of that. So when a ball bounces, it doesn't bounce in a linear form, like a, you know, like a Z shape or an N shape. It would kind of, you know, kind of do that. Solid drawing is kind of what we were talking about earlier, like last week, which is drawing objects that feel like they have depth to them. Okay. So if I have this is a box or a rectangle, right? But if I want my box to feel like it has depth, then I can use perspective. This is a little off, but, you know, cut me some slack. And then I could use, you know, shadow and things like that to give it a little more, to feel a little more three-dimensional. Okay. Solid drawing really means that your objects feel like they have actual depth. Like even though they're two-dimensional drawings, they don't feel flat. Okay, so here with Mickey, it's like due to the way his legs are positioned, the way that his torso is drawn, this arm is in front of the torso, this arm is behind the torso, you know, his eyes are behind the nose here, or in this drawing, even little things like just that little curve in the hat or this use of drapery here really gives Mickey kind of a in the fact that the feet, you know, he could have drawn the feet to be like this, where they're literally flat to the camera, but that wouldn't have felt particularly very realistic. Instead, whoever drew this drew kind of the feet kind of like that, right? They're kind of facing the camera. That gives it a little more solidness, a little more three-dimensional quality to them. So here in these characters, even though all these characters are two-dimensional, they still feel like they have depth to them. Okay, a well-drawn 3D character or two-dimensional character with depth will feel like it has depth where everything is proportionally, like even if the objects are not into normal human proportion, it's like, Homer Simpson's nose is on top of whatever this is. His arm here is in front of his torso. His torso is kind of, going this direction. This leg is in front of this leg. Everything kind of matches up to how it would be. Straight ahead versus pose to pose. What that means is that straight ahead means if you were going to animate something, you just literally keep going frame by frame, kind of like what I did here. Oops, where, you just kind of draw all of the frames and you use the last frame that you did as a reference to your next frame. So it's like, okay, here's my next frame and I'm going to draw that, and then next frame, and then I draw that, and next frame, and then I'm going to draw that, so on and so on. So this is literally a frame, straight ahead, where it's like, I'm just using the last pose as where the next pose is going to go. Sometimes people like to plan out their actions a little more. So like, let's say I was going to do something a little more complicated. Let's just say I was going to have a circle, and then maybe 15 frames later, that becomes like a triangle. Okay. So these are my poses. And then I would go, okay, these are my main poses. Now I got to figure out how to get from here to here. And then I'd like probably work backwards, where it's like, okay, it's okay. It's like next one should be kind of like that. And I'm just kind of like working my way back, so on and so on, if that makes sense. So it's like, I'm using this as kind of like it's like I'm using those as key poses and then kind of using everything else to kind of get in between them. Okay. It's not the greatest example. I think I have a good video here that kind of explains it better by someone who does a more in-depth animation. I recommend watching that one. All right, slow in, slow out has to do with the idea that objects don't usually maintain a constant speed. And what I mean by that is like, if an object is falling, I might go, okay, well, it goes from here to here, and it's like do, 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 do. I'm like separating them equidistantly, right? But the thing is, in real life, things speed up or they slow down. So when things speed up, the drawings should get further and further from each other. When they start to slow down, they should get closer and closer to each other. So let me see if I can do something kind of like that here. Let me just kind of remove all this. So it's like, oops, what happened? All right, so let's say I have a circle. Oops, I got nothing. Let me just add a little blank key thing. All right. I got this, and then I'm going to start by just doing this equidistantly. Okay. So I'm going to try to make this as equidistant as possible. That's, this is like the distance. It's, I'm not going to get it exact, but, you get hopefully the idea that like these are all kind of the same distance from each other. I could literally measure it out, but I'm just not going to do that. Okay. Let's play that back. Turn that off. Let's say I wanted my object to speed up. Well, I'm going to do this again, and let's do another one. So what would actually happen is as my ball falls, it should be gaining in speed. So like the first one is here, and then the next one is like, okay, so it's kind of doing that. And then the next one, let's get a little more distance. And then a little more distance. So the reason I'm doing this is to make the ball look like it's speeding up. Each time it's a little bit farther than it was before. The bigger the jumps, the faster your object's accelerating. I guess I shouldn't even, I've kind of gone a little too far. I should go back and redo it, but so that one feels like it's speeding up compared to this one, which is much more consistent. Okay. And if it was slowing down, it'd be the same. It would be like starting fast or starting where they get their, things are further apart and then they get closer and closer, like if something was coming to a stop. Okay. So if a ball is, when the ball is bouncing, um, there should be a couple there should be some kind of at the fastest point, it's going faster. And then as when it starts slower, it sort of gains. Okay. Here's like a example of this is like a pendulum. When it starts to swing, it's gaining momentum. So the drawings are closer. Then it's at the fastest here. And then actually when it swings up, it's actually fighting against gravity. So it starts to slow down and the drawings get closer. Then it goes back the other way and then the process repeats. Same thing here. It's like, at the beginning, there's more drawings because he's winding up. Then it's faster. And then he's slowing, then the reaction is going back. Okay. Next is this concept of follow through or overlap. Um, Follow through or overlap is the idea that objects, when the main body is moving, not all objects stop at the same time. Okay. So imagine imagine I had like a cape on, like I'm a superhero. Okay. And I jump. I'm the main body, but I would land first, and then the cape on the back of me would probably land like a half to a quarter second later. The reason why is once again based on physics. Remember, animation looks best when it mimics the concepts of physics. In real life, something like a cape would be slowed down by wind resistance because there's wind, in our atmosphere and things like that. So it would be lighter than my main body. Okay. So a lot of times, you know, lighter objects should stop about a quarter or an eighth of a second after the main body. So here it's like, see how this dog is turning, right? And then its nose is about a half frame behind here. So it's like the here it's like he's already turned and his nose is catching up to him. The same thing with like the kind of the ears here. They're kind of like a half frame behind his head or his tie. See how the tie is like kind of, it's being caught up in the wind and it's like about a half frame behind everything. Like I said, here's another example. It's like superhero falls, right? And then the cape kind of follows through because the cape is being slowed down by wind resistance. Or someone throws their hair back. So it's like her body, her torso and her head is already back, but her hair is about like a half second behind her. Okay. We talked about this actually earlier, but spacing and timing spacing sets up the timing, how fast or how slow your action appears. Okay. Um, we want things to feel correct. If something feels too slow, it feels off. If something feels too fast, we want to go back and fix that. If it's too fast, you may want to add some additional frames, like if I felt this was too fast, I could add like a frame to each one of these. Kind of helps slow this action down a little bit. If I felt it was too slow, I would try to get rid of frames and, just to speed up the action a little bit. Oops. Okay. Timing is one of those things that, it's one of those you just have to look at it and you're going to stare at it and you're going to stare at it and you're going to stare at it some more. Okay. You're just trying to, make it has to feel right. And I know that sounds kind of vague. And to be honest, it is a little vague because there's no like hard, like you always do this or you always do that. You just have to look at it and does the timing feel right? Does it feel too fast, too slow, something like that? You want to get the timing just right. Exaggeration. I did say, animation is about kind of mimicking physics, but it's also about exaggerating. As I like to say, animation is not supposed to be reality. That's what film is. Film is reality. You film a ball falling, that's how a ball falls. Okay. Animation is what I like to say, animation is about extending reality. Okay. So in our example, the ball is going to fall, but it's also going to like stretch in a way that doesn't happen in real life. Okay. Or if if it bounces, it splats against the ground. And once again, that doesn't happen in real life, or at least not unless it's like silly putty or Play-Doh or something like that. Right. So animation is about exaggerating what can happen. Okay. Even in that kind of squash and stretch, it's like that sort of, is an exaggeration, right? This kind of like weird, uh, kind of stretchy arm that comes out. That's an exaggeration, okay, of reality. So, big bug eyes, giant jaw dropping, something like that. These are all exaggerations, okay? Next is what is referred to as a secondary action. Okay. A secondary action's purpose is to add to the main action of whatever is happening. So, for instance, if someone is walking, their legs are moving, but they also might be swinging their arms, or maybe they're wiggling their hat, or whatever. Okay. Maybe they're whistling or their facial expressions. Okay. The point of a secondary action is to emphasize rather than take away from the main action. Okay, so here's some examples. This video is based on the 12 principles of M. So this is like the main action is the knocking here, right? Now he's adding in like a secondary action of like looking around. With this one, it's like he's, there's a couple of actions. It's like he's kind of doing that, right? And then he's bending his legs, and then he's also stretching his arms, and the face is also reacting. So like all of those together make this action seem more realistic. Let's see what they're doing here. So here it's like the legs are moving, his arms are swinging. not much of a secondary action. Now they're adding in a secondary action. So he's bobbing his head. He's fiddling his thumb, right? There's a little bit of movement in the cord. Now he's got some hair movement, right? He's moving forward, and now the scarf is, you know, flapping in the wind, all that. So the secondary action here, the main action is this character picking up the dumbbell. The secondary action is him like getting his arms ready and, you know, doing this, you know. So this, the main action is him typing. That's a secondary action, him like wiping his brow. Here he's like tapping his toe, tapping his arm or his hand. So those would be secondary actions that kind of, you know, support the main action. Let's look at this in like a traditional, here's some. So here it's like the secondary action's really all in Tom. So he's like, his like arms are moving, his head, like all of that is kind of a secondary. His like feet are moving. It's not just one part of his body. They're all kind of reacting. So it's like his feet are tapping, his arms are, you know, going crazy. So his arms and his ears and all that, that's like the secondary action. Okay. So here's some more examples. It's like the primary action is the character running, but the secondary action is he has this hat that's flopping around. Okay, that reacts. That's to show that he's in motion. That's the secondary action. Primary action is him, this character kind of, you know, making a bug eye face. The secondary action is this kind of hat, you know, chicken comb, whatever this is, kind of like bouncing forward. Okay. Finally, this last one's called appeal. Appeal is something that makes your character interesting. Okay, you can have a character that, you know, has those other elements of design or of animation, meaning they could be solid drawing and secondary action and all that, but the character itself might be a little boring. Okay, appeal means that the character is interesting in some way, shape, or form. It's that kind of je ne sais quoi. You know, I always say that appeal for a character in animation is kind of like charisma for a human. You can have two people who are, you know, exactly the same, but one has more charisma. And charisma is kind of one of these things. It's like kind of hard to pinpoint what about them is charismatic, but they have something that, you know, makes them interesting. That's kind of what appeal is for a character. It has to have some element of it that makes the character a little bit more interesting. Okay. All right. So I recommend watching this video. It kind of is going to go through. It's a cute little video. It's only about 2.5 minutes long. Someone basically took all the principles of animation and then illustrates them using, you know, a little cube. It's very cute, I think. So I recommend watching this real quick. And so this will go over kind of the principles of animation. In the next video, we are going to do a bouncing ball where I'm going to show you how to use some of these principles like slow in, slow out, squash and stretch, timing, that kind of stuff to give a bouncing ball more life to it. Okay.